Breeding decisions shape the future of the herd, but what do the latest semen trends tell us? Jim Bruce has spent decades in artificial breeding and genetics and is a non-executive director at DataGene, as well as the country manager for Viking genetics in Australia and New Zealand. With a stint in animal nutrition, he's been around cattle all through his career at one end or the other. Jim Bruce is joined today by a panel of industry experts, including Bruce Ronalds, Business Operation Manager from ABS, Darren Fletcher, the Sales Manager from Total Livestock Genetics, and Glen Barrett, the General Manager from Jersey, Australia. So now let us welcome Jim Bruce and our panel of fine experts speaking about the NHIA Annual Semen Market Survey and covering a review of semen trends. Welcome to the stage.
Simple talk there. Is this going to be simple talk? Oh, yes. Forward, backwards.
Forward, backwards.
Gotcha. Thank you. Thank you. Just making sure the technology was straightforward. It's forwards, backwards, 2 buttons. Should be right with that. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the opportunity. The Semen Market Survey that is conducted every year is one of the enduring areas of collaboration across the semen industry. And I think it's important that we get these insights. I will actually go forward on the slide. The button does work, that's great. And I'd like to acknowledge the companies that contribute through NHIA to the data that we can then analyse to look at the trends, the changing trends, and discuss market composition as we move forward. So we're going to drill down into the data. My brains trust here, I'll refer to them as we go along. If you can save your questions to the end, we'll try to keep within our allocated time. That being said, we'll roll into the first slide. That's the second slide. Okay, we'll roll into the first slide where we're looking at the total semen sold in Australia. So this includes imported semen, exported semen, and domestically produced semen. So what we're seeing of recent times is a downward trend. And so what I'd like to present with the help of my brains trust, and I'll just remind these guys that as you're lined up there with the lights in your eyes, it's customary to be offered a blindfold before you'll hear the guns load. So just, if there's no blindfold, you'll be okay. So we're seeing this downward trend, but what I want to drill into is what's the underlying movements in the marketplace, and I think in particular market composition is what we're going to look at. And at the end of it, I hope you'll agree with me that it's a pretty good picture. It's not all downwards. So this slide from the data, and again, the contributors have we have, without fear or favour, contributed our data. The company I work with, we put our data in. It's all in there without bias, and it is what it is, and it's what we have to work with. So when we pull out that export component, this graph is showing us what's sold in the domestic market, imported and local bulls sold in the domestic market. So there's a difference between those first 2 slides in the last 12 months of around 100,000 units of semen. So the first thing I'd like to explore as we drill into it is what is happening with dairy semen from an export perspective. So that 100,000 is pretty much made up of about 12,000 of Holstein, 68,000 of Jersey, and it's 8 to 10,000, I think, of Australian Reds. So that's generally the composition. Bruce was good enough to make the point as we were preparing for this that we shouldn't look at export sales as an annual thing and annual trends because of the frailty of logistics, and quite often, you know, a shipment is delayed, a shipment falls into the next calendar year, into the next survey year for reasons outside of our control. But that being said, I guess the first thing I wanted to throw to the panel, I'll throw to Glen. The biggest chunk at the moment in the data that we've got is about Jersey exports. So Glen, tell us a little bit about where that Jersey semen's going to, if you would.
Yeah, I think the majority of the market there is South Africa, which has predominantly been a 10 to 15 year sales success story for Australian jerseys. But we are seeing some growth and interest into North America, which is terrific to see. We've seen that year on year. In the last 2 or 3 years, we've been involved in the World Expo campaign. But talking with the AI service providers, there's markets into Europe, into South America, into New Zealand. So I think whilst South Africa is the dominant market force there in the Jersey semen, the other markets are growing and expanding.
And you guys, either side, Darren and Bruce, you guys are involved a little bit with export semen as well. Are you seeing similar sort of pictures with Jersey? Is it a varied range of locations that it's going to?
Yeah, I think it's worldwide, really. I think we're in the enviable situation at the moment where the Australian Jersey has been, it's probably one of the best jerseys in the world. Works in any farming system, whether it be in a barn or in a grazing pasture base. So I think it's a highly sought after product at the moment, which is really good for our Jersey guys. Great.
Okay, thank you guys. So moving further, I like this one button clicker. What we've traditionally done with the semen market surveys, we look at dairy semen sales by breed, and we look at the trends by breed, which breeds up, which breeds down. What we're going to do as we go through this presentation is we're going to move a little bit from dairy semen sales to dairy cows, because that's the part that I think is changing, and that's what in the drill down we start to see as the market trend. So we can see in these numbers 3 years of data where there's a decline in Holstein of about 7.5% on rough numbers. So where we've seen a total decline of about 140,000 units year on year in dairy semen sales. There is about 100,000 there in Holstein. There's about 10,000 in the Reds. There's about 10,000 in the crossbreds, the Kiwi Cross and similar. So that accounts for the majority of it. Jersey, good story here. Jersey is stable. So where's that 140,000 units? That's what we're going to have a bit of a look at. And what's the overall picture for the semen industry with that? So as we look at it, I think, and the introduction that we have that you've all read in the program is about drilling down into the market demands, emerging trends, etc. So some years back, 2018, if my eyes are good enough, looking at the slide again, we saw that genomic semen has outstripped proven bull semen. Progeny test semen per se is in decline with the rise of genomics. So this is something that we've tracked through the survey, something that we've graphed every year through the survey, but this isn't really giving any insight as to that downward trend of dairy semen sales. Where's that gone? So we start to look at doses of conventional semen sold, of dairy semen, and that's come down. Those that are in the semen business here probably don't see any great surprise as sex semens become more and more reliable and more popular. So we start to see the rise of sex semen at the same period of time as that gentle decline in conventional semen. So what I guess we wanted to drill into when we saw this graph is we're now seeing that sexed semen total starting to tip over. So I'm going to call to the panel and just ask, what are the factors, guys, that you think are actually leading in? And I'll go to Bruce first. What are the factors that are leading into this decline in the sexed product?
Yeah, certainly from our business point of view, we see a lot more farmers now moved away from sex semen because the market to China, so a lot of farms are actually using a lot of sex semen on their herd. That's actually been now reduced for the fact that there's actually no China market. So a lot of them were actually breeding them on to actually sell as export heifers over to China. That's basically disappeared at the moment, so there's been a real downturn because of that.
And I think, Fletch, we talked this last night, there was another factor that probably feeds into this,
Yeah, there's probably been a little reduction in care numbers too, probably, and seasonal conditions sort of does contribute to these things. Financially. And I thought about it a bit more after we had our discussion last night, JB, and probably milk price volatility sort of does play a little part into it also, where we we sort of, in the last couple of years, we've seen a bit of uncertainty around milk price, so farmers are shoring up their businesses a little bit?
I think that's right. I think also we see overall confidence of the dairy sector when milk price comes in, dry autumns, those sorts of things start to change purchasing plans. But also if we were to overlay some of the beef calf prices into this timeline, we start to see that dairy beef became something of more interest. The prices that were offered have somewhat evaporated now, but that may have played into this quite interesting graph, and I think it's a graph that actually tells a story in its own right. So from that, I decided that, and I liked Dr. Jeff made a point that he really likes data, and the Semen industry survey is really good at producing data, and one of the things that Dr. Jeff said was there's a whole lot of data that's really interesting, but there's only some data that you can actually make any use of. And so drilling into it, I did a little bit of that sort of analysis work. So what we're looking at in this slide is the total semen doses sold to the dairy sector. This is where we switch from the way we've looked at this survey as being dairy semen sales. This is now semen sales to the dairy sector. So now we're looking at conventional dairy, sexed dairy, imported beef on dairy and domestic beef on dairy. Now I've cut those out into those 4 headings because that's the way they're presented in the data. I haven't cut that out for any particular reason. So you get the total doses, and then I put the extra line in. I went to my good friends at DA and pulled in the national herd size, the number of cows, and yes, the cow numbers have been in decline, but they're not inexplicably linked. So it does tell us as an industry we need to look at the other forces that are impacting on our industry and what's changing and shaping the composition of the marketplace. And I guess in looking at that, we're starting to see where that 140,000 units went, because the total doses to market is relatively stable, and it's certainly not tracking similarly with the cow numbers. So I think in that space we're starting to find where did the 140,000 units go, and we start to look at that beef on dairy product. That's just put up the same slide, hasn't it? Another thing that we've tracked in the survey for some time is the A2 gene in the product that's being offered to market. And I guess this slide doesn't get a lot of time because in the last 3 years it's flatlined. And when we look at data that's interesting and data that's useful, I think we've got to the stage where this data is struggling to be both. We've got to the stage, I think, and anybody who would like to comment can send us a question through Slido, but I think with the A2 thing, it's a thing. There's no arguing. There it is. It's I can't read it now. It's 1.3. Yeah. Thanks, guys, with younger eyes. It's 1.3 million units. That's A2. It's clear that the market is using it. It's available, and that's where their preference is. So we probably won't report on this at the next conference. We've already established beef semen is a thing. So I thought it's also amongst the membership of those that contribute the data. It's really important that we do start looking at the beef side of the industry. And this graph shows total beef semen sold, and it looks really volatile, with big green stripes that go up and down and up and down. But if you actually look at the numbers, it's not as volatile as that. This is beef on dairy and beef on beef. So I wanted to address that apparent volatility, and I'm going to throw to Bruce to give us some insight as to what you guys see in the beef marketplace. ABS have a big chunk of that beef on beef in particular. What are your observations?
Yeah, I think the challenge really around beef on beef is to continue to grow that commercial space. I think in the stud sector, there's really no issues. Farmers are really happy to use semen, use their programs. But the challenge is where it becomes a lot more fertile is commercial herds that move in and out of using AI. There's a massive sector there that have never even touched AI that can be tapped into. So I think that's where it's getting a bit of an up and down spread is to do with when farm gate prices are at a really squeezed, then they tend to put a bull out rather than use AI. So.
Yep. Very good. Our final slide here looks at all the beef data. It's probably got a lot on there. I don't know how good your eyes are compared to mine, but it's a couple of things that I think are significant in this, and we'll lean into that just a little bit. Firstly, if we look at the combination of beef on dairy, import and domestic, we've got about 250,000 units in there, and the beef on beef is just under 200,000 units. And I think this is the first time in the survey where we've seen beef on dairy go beyond beef on beef in the Australian market. Now, having said that, I think it's also worth noting that if we look into what that, which I did, if we look into that beef on dairy semen, what is it? And the biggest chunk of it would be Angus. And then there's another very large chunk that's Wagyu, but the thing we probably need to acknowledge is that there's a lot of Wagyu semen that goes through businesses outside of our membership, so that there's probably more Wagyu semen going through. So that amount of dairy beef semen that's going to the marketplace is probably significantly bigger again compared to the beef on beef. So that's a big change in our business, and I think we're across it as businesses, but I think that's the composition change that we're looking at, and that was one of the key things in looking at, instead of dairy semen sales, looking at sales of semen to dairy cows was more important in getting that information out of the survey. The other piece in the far right is the export component of beef semen, and there's two pieces to that. The largest chunk of that is Wagyu, and I'll come back to that in just a minute, which I think might be of interest to the group. There's also a significant chunk of semen in there that's Brahman, and I think it's worth noting that the Brahman semen that we're exporting largely going to South America, it's probably a part of the industry that a lot of us in this room, which we tend to be a little bit dairy focused, we tend to be a little bit southern focused. It's a very big, I think it's a very significant milestone that we're actually exporting Brahman semen into those countries and even into the United States, where a lot of our source genetics came from for that breed. The other part to Wagyu is, Wagyu's a Japanese thing. So Bruce, can you help me? Where are we sending Aussie Wagyu to?
Yeah, a big part of it. I mean, we've probably got some of the best Wagyu here in Australia, and certainly the demand for Wagyu globally is just increasing. A lot of the Wagyu that we see goes to the UK, where they've got contracts with suppliers and it's all beef on dairy over there. So certainly a lot of Australian Wagyu going to the UK. They don't use a lot of conventional dairy semen. It's basically sexed and dairy beef.
So I think that when we look at semen export, probably there's a lot of people in the room may not have thought Wagyu was a great Australian success story in terms of semen export. So that's something that we learn from our industry semen survey. That's drilling down in the data, that's working through the data that's interesting to find the data that's actually quite useful. So there we see the final graph looks at the total semen export, beef and dairy, where we've spoken about the dairy component, which is at the moment quite strongly Jersey focused, and in the beef side of it, it's quite strongly Wagyu focused. And there's probably also, again in that Wagyu space, Wagyu that's outside the membership, that's also going various places. So that's quite a significant business that we see out there in the market. So with that being said, we've got to the end of our slide deck, and we'd like to start opening the floor if there are questions. Sorry, not the end of our slide deck. I've got to put up the QR code because you can download the full report if you want to capture that QR code. That QR code is available on screen. Is it anywhere else, Sarah, the QR code?
Just there, which takes you to the website to download.
So you've got to get it there. That's where it is. So whilst that is up, I mean, I open the floor to questions, and also there's Slido. And any other comments on the material from the firing squad? From the Brains Trust. Anybody? Any questions there? Has anybody found anything that was not what they expected? We have a question.
Yeah. With the drop in semen doses sold and the advances in technology with semen quality, do you think there's any link to the ability to provide higher quality semen to the need for as many doses as you normally would?
It's a really good question. I have a Brains Trust here that I'll palm this one off to. So the question is semen quality also contributing to the lower number of doses sold? Is that a fair summation? Yep.
I'll have a crack at this.
Good job.
I wouldn't necessarily say that semen quality, because I know from our perspective we have very high standards with our semen quality, and it's technology's like everything else in the industry. Technology's always improving, so I think confidence in the product, doesn't matter whose it is should be really high. So I don't think actual semen quality is a restriction on the product.
Any other comment?
Yeah, I'd probably just echo those thoughts. I think probably there's been a slight improvement in the quality of sex semen, and probably the use of sex semen's been a lot more strategic in the last few years, so hence leading to probably some better conception rates there, but yeah.
Cool. Okay, now we've got a couple of questions on Slido. The loss of 121,000 units of sexed semen over the past 2 years with an estimated value of 4.8 million. What impacts will... This is a very long question, Anthony. What impacts will this have on semen supply service? Okay, do we get that? So with a loss of 121,000 units over the past 2 years and a significant value, what impacts will this have on semen supply service? Anybody want to have a crack at that one?
I'll have another crack, I guess.
May as well, because hopefully
I
you're at the
guess
same meeting.
from our perspective, having the facility at Camperdown certainly makes it difficult to staff the facilities and the likes of that when you haven't got a steady flow of semen through. I know, and Bruce, you probably know this too, that in the US they pretty much run the facilities and sexing 24 hours a day, 3 or 4 days a week, because they know how many units they need and the likes of that. So I guess it's not just going to be the fluctuations in the amount of semen, but as Anthony puts in there, the $4.8 million is a fair chunk of money to come out of the dairy economy as well. So
yep.
I guess it's going to have an impact, but until we see some steadying in the numbers, I think it'll be what it's going to be.
Yeah, well, I think if you look at the data there, Jim, you've probably got some transition of that sex semen to the dairy beef, so obviously it's been taken up most likely by a lower margin product too, which is probably not helping that semen supply bottom line.
That's right, I think he mentions the 4.8, yeah. So it is, there's got to be an adjustment. We can maintain volume, but we've actually got to look at how do we get value. So I guess that this question leads into a discussion that all the semen companies can go back and have about semen price. Have I got time for that last question? You going to let me do that? Okay. How is the polled semen trending over the past few years, and how many doses are sold annually? Now, I didn't actually extract that out of the data specifically for this presentation because...
Jim, I could probably answer that.
You can answer that? Thank you very much.
I think from what I've seen on the market share survey, there's been a fairly hefty lift, and I think probably if you went back about 4 years ago, it was as low as in the Holsteins around 40,000 units. I think it's as high as about 240, 250,000 units. So that's a pretty hefty lift in the last 3 years of polled semen. I think poll just continues to grow. Farmers don't want to spend that extra money, plus the welfare issues that it creates from a commercial aspect. Poll bulls, particularly in Holsteins and the Reds, you're really not reducing your genetic gain these days. Still a little bit of work to do in the Jerseys, but certainly the other two breeds just continue to grow in the amount of people after polled. And when we talk polled, double P, not homozygous polled, not hetero. So
Yep.
certainly on the increase big time.
And I'm going to sneak the last one in really fast. And there was a question there about the use of herd bulls. I'm just looking for a comment. And I think it's something that we didn't mention as one of those factors that's looking at the variability in the amount of semen used. Herd bulls is, from a semen company perspective, I actively promote drive-by shootings where herd bulls are concerned because they're the enemy of semen sales. But that being said, I don't know that anyone's actioned that directive yet, but that being said, I think when we do see milk price down, the season gets tough, when those issues start to squeeze in on the dairy sector, herd bulls go in earlier. Herd bulls become a part of that dynamic. I don't think there's any arguing that. A lot of people will use herd bulls for mop-up. Sometimes they go in earlier, and that's going to impact on semen sold for certain. I think we're going to get rung off because, well, there goes the hook. So thank you, gentlemen. No blindfolds required. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jim and the panel. Well done.